Welcome back in Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Take a look. Russian President Vladimir Putin is publicly acknowledging that Ukrainian long-range strikes are creating fuel supply problems inside Russia. Videos obtained by Fox News Digital show long lines, angry motorists, and fights erupting at gas stations across several Russian regions. Meanwhile, Putin is continuing to face pressure from long-range Ukrainian drone attacks. President Zelensky has been posting videos like this in recent days. On Tuesday, over 400 drones were reportedly shot down across Russia, including in Moscow and in Crimea, according to Russian authorities. Let's bring in retired Marine intelligence officer, national security analyst, and the host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kempfer. He's here with me. Hal, the Kremlin doesn't usually acknowledge that Ukraine is impacting Russia beyond the battlefield, but they are now. Why?
Oh, they're having to. Austin, the problem is they can't deny the gas lines. They can't deny, refineries and other facilities going up in flames and smoke drifting over Moscow and St. Petersburg. They just simply can't hide it anymore. These drone strikes by the Ukrainians are all over Russia right now, certainly all over European Russia. Some of them have gotten as far as a little bit east of the Urals. And so he had to say something. The other thing is gas prices. The gas is restricted, gasoline, and that's because of the refinery attacks. So it's extremely expensive. You see prices there. The price of gas in some areas was $25 a gallon, to give you an idea of how big, how expensive it is. It's incredible. And you see these long lines. A lot of times you just can't get gas. And of course, the latest reports are that a lot of times in these lines, frustrated motorists have been getting out of their cars and literally getting into fist fights because they're so angry with how things are going. So it forced Putin to do something he never wants to do. His narrative's always the same. We're doing great in Ukraine. We're going to win. Everything's, all the offensive actions are successful. Basically it's a standard Russian line, no matter what the facts on the ground are. He finally had to admit that the Ukrainians are having an impact on Russian gasoline supplies. He just couldn't hide it anymore, and he can't hide the fact that you got drones flying into Moscow and hitting things all over Moscow and setting things ablaze.
We weren't able to independently get the video of the fights themselves. Fox News Digital has it posted on their social account. You see a screen grab of it there. This is how they describe it. Tempers are boiling over at Russian gas stations throughout the country as drivers get caught on camera fighting over fuel. The chaotic scenes come as Vladimir Putin publicly acknowledged Russia is facing a shortage of fuel after months of Ukrainian drone strikes on the country's oil refineries disrupted supplies. Long lines and fuel rationing are now being reported across multiple regions, putting rare public pressure on everyday Russians as the war's impact reaches farther inside the country. And again, I'll go back to these videos that Zelensky has been sending out as of late of the long-range strikes, the drone warfare. Drone warfare is not new to this war, Hal. So why is so much attention being paid to the Ukrainians' most recent drone attacks on Russia? Is it because it's hitting places like Moscow and Crimea? Is that the point here?
Better drones. It really boils down to better drones. Firepoint has been putting out some drones, which are excellent drones for long range. They've also put out excellent drones for intermediate range. That's the one that doesn't get as much attention because it's not spectacular, doesn't hit Moscow, but it has been just destroying the supply lines and the lines of communication, and logistics lines of communication in Ukraine, in and around Ukraine. Crimea has been virtually cut off. It's a peninsula that's now sort of becoming an island in terms of its ability, in terms of being resupplied, because they just can't get stuff in there. By the way, I should mention in Crimea, which is, Russians claim it's theirs, but it's a Ukrainian territory they took in 2014. They have cut off all gasoline sales to civilians because they just don't have the gasoline. They just simply can't get it in. And there's rumors, or at least stories, that the Kerch Bridge, which is about the only way they can get stuff in now that stretches over to mainland Russia, that the Ukrainians may do another mass bombing of it and shut down the Kerch Bridge altogether, which would cause, take a bad situation and just make it a horrendous situation from a supply chain standpoint in Crimea. So long story short, their drones are working better. The other thing too is watching this, and this is something we were talking about on the air last year, was the production rates of drones. That the drones they're able to produce more drones per month than they did before. So now they've kind of hit that point where they have this massive production output, and they're able to do this. The big thing is with the drones is also things like the FP5 Flamingo cruise missile. That's their cruise missile that's kind of roughly equivalent to our Tomahawk. That's another part of the equation where they're able to do these long-range strikes. The Russians seem to be having very little, if any, ability to intercept those, and those deliver a warhead of over a ton of explosives. So that you can imagine when that hits a refinery, it causes some significant damage, significant long-term damage, depending on where it hits.
This improved dynamic that the Ukrainians have with drones as of late, is this enough to turn the tide of the war? Is this enough for the Ukrainians to really do some damage in a way that could impact the trajectory of the fight in the long run?
Well, what it's done on the front lines is it makes it very difficult for Russians to do sustained offensive operations because they simply can't supply their troops. So they don't have the ammunition, they don't have the food, they don't have all the stuff you need in order to keep troops on the front line supplied. They just can't get that stuff in there. With that said, I mean, the Russians have the numbers. They've got more personnel, although one of the problems the Russians are facing is that they're losing more troops every month than they're actually able to generate through recruitment, mobilization, stuff like that. So that's a negative mathematical problem that the Russians are dealing with. It's just simply the number of troops they're losing due to serious injuries or being killed outright on the battlefield. That's a problem. The longer the Russians are stalemated, the more politically difficult it is for Putin to maintain the war. And especially now, and this is kind of a psychological dynamic, now that the Ukrainians have finally been able to take the war home to the Russians, something they have not been able to do in the previous years. Now that it's finally coming home to the Russians that they are vulnerable, that they can be hit with Ukrainian drones and missiles, just like Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine are being hit by Russian drones and missiles. That's a huge dynamic. And the reports I've seen are that Putin is basically hiding out in underground shelters. He's not going to events that he used to go to. He's just being very careful. And of course, we've talked about in the air the fact that some of these big things, like the Victory Day Parade, turned into a much more scaled down Victory Day Parade. No tanks or heavy equipment there because he's afraid he's going to get attacked by drones.
We have this statement in. The EU is talking about this. This is from the head of the European Commission. He says Ukraine's ingenuity lies at the heart of its success in resisting Russia's full-scale invasion. It is this ingenuity that we want to support. Today, they're providing billions for advanced drone technology to strengthen Ukraine's defense, and they say more will follow. How important is the EU in this fight moving forward, Hal?
It's absolutely crucial. Part of that is because the U.S. has pulled back a lot of its support, certainly in terms of money, but also materials. We have a commitment that we will sell them military equipment, ammunition, things like that, but we have not. And we won't give them Tomahawk missiles. That's one of the reasons they developed their own separate Flamingo 5 program, was to meet that shortfall. But the EU is absolutely critical. That 3.9 billion euros is part of a 90 billion euro loan that the EU just got passed. By the way, elections do matter, particularly in Hungary. Viktor Orban was finally voted out of office. It took forever. He was the thorn in the side of the EU on Ukraine aid. He was always boycotting this, stopping it from being approved. Once he was out of office, boom, it was approved, and you're starting to see that money flow over there. And the interesting thing, too, is the EU and all of its member states are all rushing to Ukraine to cut deals with their defense industry. They've seen the shift in warfare. They've seen how drones, robotics, all these things are changing the modern battlefield. And they're getting in there and teaming up with the Ukrainian companies to co-produce things. So you're seeing a lot of things like Germany has a number of agreements to work jointly with Ukrainian firms on weapons production. and there does seem to be a bit of a rush across Europe to team with Ukraine. They're also seeing Ukraine as a critical part of the European construct of keeping the Russians at bay. So it's a bit of a strategic shift in terms of who's leading. It was the U.S. Now it appears to be Europe is really taking a lead role.
There's being some discussion online about the possibility of Russian mobilization of some type. Are you seeing what I'm seeing, and what's the implications? Really, what does that mean, Russian mobilization?
Well, the Institute for the Study of War is probably one of the best open sources of all of what's going on there. Tremendous analysis. They've looked at this. Obviously, Putin is very concerned of the political dynamic if he does another mass mobilization, a mass draft, because that certainly after everything that's happened so far, that would be a full admission that he is failing in this war against Ukraine, that everything he said before is kind of empty promises or empty rhetoric. And so he's been trying to find out different ways to do it. One of the things they're looking at, a couple of things, they're calling it, sometimes they call it a covert mobilization or a rolling mobilization, where they'll go through and they'll mobilize certain units for a certain amount of time, but they do this on a rolling basis. What they don't mention is they mobilize those units, and if they go to the front lines, they tend to have tremendous attrition rates. But he's trying to do that to avoid this. He's also doing a lot of things like, signing up all the men that go to universities and colleges and getting them in there and doing some stuff where he says, hey, we're updating our draft. We're not drafting you, we're just updating our draft rolls. And then they find a myriad of ways to use that information to go get them to force them or compel them into joining the services. But the problem is they've been paying these huge bonuses, up to $80,000 to join the military. I mean, it's phenomenal. By Russian terms, it's absolutely amazing how much they pay them. Not working. It's just not working like it was. For a while it was, but now they see what's going on. They realize it's a one-way ticket, and it's just not working. And there's a report out now that says when new troops get to the front lines, and I'm a little skeptical this is the way it was portrayed. They said when new Russian troops get to the front lines, they survive for 20 minutes. I don't know where they came up with that number. I can say that I've seen stuff where new troops in combat, intensive combat, maybe 20 minutes. I don't think they get to the front lines and then 20 minutes later they're hauling them off in a body bag. But it does tell you the problems they're having, and particularly in training and readiness, everything else that goes with having, maintaining forces in an environment like that.
You can listen to the Strat podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Thanks, Hal.
All right. Thanks, Austin.
You bet. So I wanted to make sure we got Zelensky's latest statement in before we take a quick commercial break. Zelensky talking about the long-range missiles, the long-range strikes, I should be more specific, that they've been doing. A lot of this is having to do with drone warfare. He says, today, our long-range sanctions against Russia for this war once again reached the Dubna Space Communications Center in the Moscow region. This is a special satellite communications facility used in particular for reconnaissance and for coordinating the activity of Russia's occupation contingent in Ukraine. The distance from our state border to this facility is more than 500 kilometers. Recently, our defense forces of Ukraine already reached 4 such Russian centers, not only in the Moscow region, but also in the Vladimir region. Step by step, we are implementing our plan of long-range sanctions and making it as difficult as possible for the aggressor state to carry out its invasion operations against Ukraine and the occupation of our territories. Relevant actions are also being prepared against other similar enemy facilities. I thank our warriors for their accuracy. Glory to Ukraine, Zelensky says.